This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast on travel and stereotypes. Now, we've talked about stereotypes a while back in episode 4 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, but it's an issue that keeps coming up, and I think it's just such an interesting one. When we travel, I think we encounter new stereotypes when we visit a country that we haven't been to before or meet a bunch of people from a new nationality. But at the same time, and more so, we dispel stereotypes. We get to know individual people from the countries that we've had long-held stereotypes in our heads about, and we realise over and over again that everybody is different, although at the same time, everybody across the world is somehow the same. I think it's just one of those things that the more you travel, the more you realise that both of these things are true. So we're going to talk about stereotypes with a few different travellers today who've had some really interesting experiences creating and deleting stereotypes, let's say. Before we get on to my guests today, though, I did want to say a big hello and thank you to the lovely members of our new Facebook group at Thoughtful Travellers. So welcome to everyone who's joined up so far. And if you want to get in on the conversation there, then hop over to Facebook. And if you search for Thoughtful Travellers, you should find the group there and be able to request to join. I'll leave a link in the show notes as well, but it's at facebook.com/groups/Thoughtful Travellers. And if you do not spell the British way, then you might need to watch out because Travellers has 2 L's because that's the way we do it down here too. All right, we're having already some really interesting conversations there, and I look forward to having more of you join up. Now, before we get on to my first guest, Jeremy Kloberdanz, I actually wanted to tell a quick story about some of the stereotypes that I have encountered. So back in episode 4, I spoke about the stereotypical German because I did live in Germany for a few years, and there's certain characteristics that are quite common to a number of Germans. But the other place I lived for a couple of years is Japan, and as I record this, I'm preparing to return to Japan for the first time in 13 years. So I've been thinking a lot about Japan lately and about Japanese people who I think are quite unique. They seem to me, on the whole, as a nation, to be different to lots of other kinds of nationalities around the world. And before I went to Japan, I sort of had an idea of a vague stereotype of Japanese people. But when I lived there, I really felt that so many of them had a number of very positive characteristics. And I guess that's the case. That makes it a better stereotype, a stereotype I don't mind talking about so much. So I think almost without exception, I certainly can't think of an exception, Japanese people were very kind and welcoming to me as a foreigner, and countless times they went out of their way to help me in all kinds of different ways. And the common thing that you hear from so many people is that, oh, I asked for directions and this Japanese person went 10 minutes out of their way to show me the way to the train station I needed to find, and things like that. And I just think, what a beautiful stereotype that is. In that case, I don't mind there being a stereotype. And it seemed to be true in so many instances of my experiences there. But stereotypes can also be more problematic and can be concerning for the people involved in some ways. It'll make sense in a minute when we listen to Jeremy's story about a man that he and Katie met in Italy. So we've heard from Jeremy and Katie before. I did interview them together, but if I remember rightly, just Jeremy's here to tell us this story about one night in Italy.
Just to kind of, expand on the topic of stereotypes, we were trying to really do that for ourselves. But then, of course, like anything, we had stereotypical thoughts of other people, other cultures. And I think one of the biggest lessons that we've learned out of traveling like we have is you can't judge the book by the cover, as cliche and kind of corny as that sounds. We've met so many amazing people and so many amazing stories and so many just great situations that have really taught us that, everyone is really the same when it comes down to the core. The majority of people are extremely friendly. They're caring. They want to help other people out, and they're curious. We were in a few months ago in Italy, and we needed a late night bite to eat and stumbled into a kebab shop, and we're ordering. And like I said earlier, I talked to everyone. And so I get talking to this guy who's working there by himself. He'd been working all day. I mean, literally from like noon until I think we were there after midnight. I had worked late that night. And when we first started asking him about himself, he asked where we were from, and I told him the United States. And I could see a little bit of apprehension with him wanting to tell us where he was from. And so he said he was from Pakistan at the beginning. And so I started asking him, what brought him there and what kind of how old he was, how that journey worked, what the process was for him to move there, and what he had planned for the next, what he wanted to get out of moving there. And so he started kind of describing the fact that he had to leave due to different conflict. And about halfway through the conversation, he said, I'm not actually from Pakistan. I'm from Afghanistan. And he was nervous to tell me that because of, obviously U.S. has conflict there. And he didn't want it to turn into, I don't know. He was nervous to say that. But getting to talk to him, I think so many times people get these preconceived notions about other countries that you have conflict in, and then also people who are working in something like a fast food place. I started asking him about his background. He was extremely educated, spoke 8 or 7 different languages, understood 8 languages. He was a remarkable person. He just was situationally not as fortunate as some others, and had to leave because of conflict. And that was, to him, that was a better situation than staying in a war zone and staying in that area that he grew up in, and he was making it work. But I think a lot of people would go in and not talk to him, and not really respect him because of what job he had and maybe the accent that he had and how he appeared. But he was so remarkable and in fact, he was so interesting to me and so remarkable that Katie and I went back several times, not necessarily for the food, but for him to talk more with him.
That's fabulous. And I think that's one of the great things about traveling, is that you're able to meet more of these kinds of people, and you're in situations where you can chat more. And I just think if everybody could do that, like, imagine how much more peaceful the world would be if they could just, appreciate, for example, that man's story and why he ends up, working in a restaurant when he, who knows, he was an engineer or a doctor back home and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people just really don't bother to take the time to understand how everyone's stories have impacted them and all of the things they've been through. And yeah, good on you.
Well, and I think Americans, they justify things like war and what's happened with the conflict with Afghanistan and some of the Middle East, and they want to justify it by talking about the differences and talking about kind of demonizing, and the media demonizes these people to make it more palatable for Americans in telling them this is why we're sending troops there. Mm-hmm. And it's such a gross generalization, and it's such a bad idea to do that, because it gives people those stereotypes that I know people in my life who potentially wouldn't want to have a conversation with someone, from those parts of the world because of that.
Yeah, you're so right. And it's highlighting the differences instead of what I think happens through travel is it highlights what's the same about everybody.
Exactly.
The start of Jeremy's story made me a little sad. It was kind of stereotypes working in several directions. This Afghanistani guy was concerned because of his stereotype of Americans, and worried about what they held as a stereotype of people from Afghanistan, and didn't want to admit where he came from and all of this. But I do like the end of the story where they went back several times, got to chat further, and as Jeremy summed up really nicely, that sort of negative or incorrect stereotypes tend to highlight the differences between people, but when you travel and meet people, that really shows you the similarities instead. And I think, that's one of the really valuable parts of traveling. Now, my next guest is Lola Akinmade Åkerström, who is Nigerian and now living in Sweden. So you can imagine that she probably faces some battles with some preconceived ideas and stereotypes that people there would have. And this is something of what she talks about in our chat today, about her experience of trying to be a cultural ambassador. I think she's a really strong person to do it this way, but I'll let her tell you about it.
I think one of the challenges with what we do is trying to convince people that people actually travel very differently, but more so they experience travel differently based on their background. So when I say there was a post I wrote a while back saying, okay, your friend has just gone on this amazing round the world trip. They were invited into the homes of locals. They just had an amazing time. And then you want to go on your own trip, but your experience was totally different. Locals weren't as warm or open to you, and you're wondering why. And sometimes it may be as simple as just the color of your skin, and so that shouldn't stop you from traveling, but that shows that the world still sees people very differently. They still accept people differently when they travel. And so one of the things I do is, especially being a Black travel writer and Black travel photographer in this space, is I try to almost be a cultural ambassador, meaning when I travel, I not only soak up other cultures like a sponge, right? But I also squeeze out a bit of my own culture, like a sponge as well.
Yeah, nice.
At every place I visit to say, look, I know it feels like a burden to carry while I'm traveling, but I'm saying, stop watching what you see on TV is not the true representation of who I am or who we are as a people. And so I try to be the cultural ambassador to show them that there are different kinds of people traveling this world, and just be open-minded and be flexible when you travel. So it's you can't always change
no, but
an ignorant person, but what you can do is ignorance comes from not having as much access to what you're ignorant about. And so what you want to do is educate, so they become a little bit less ignorant. And the more they get educated on a particular subject, on a particular group of people, then they become less ignorant. So again, ignorance usually comes from fear of the unknown. And once you start making the unknown more known, it chips away at ignorance.
I think that's such a great attitude. And you're right, you can't change the mind instantly of an ignorant person, but by having an interaction and explaining something of your culture, then it means that the next time they have, ridiculous ignorant thoughts, they have something to pin it against and think, oh yeah, but I met this girl and she was so nice or something. Right. It's, yeah. But like you say, that is a bit of a burden, or, I mean, are there times that you don't want to be that way, don't want to be a cultural ambassador?
No, because there's still a lot of work to do. And even just looking at just professionally, I'm a professional travel photographer as well, in a space that's mostly dominated by, white guys that look like mountain climbers, right?
Yep.
and so I still have to keep pushing to say, yes, I'm also allowed to work in this space too. Yes. And if you don't think so, you have to give me a valid reason beyond the color of my skin. You have to actually come up with a valid reason, because, I'm confident in the work I do. I'm confident in my portfolio. And I've been doing this for many years now, at a professional level. So I have to keep working and pushing through the space, pushing through the resistance, because I do get a lot of resistance,
I
but I have
bet.
to keep pushing it because I want to show also my daughter that it's okay for her to be in this space as well in the future, confidently working, as a travel photographer if she wants to be.
Or whatever she chooses. If there's if there's
Exactly.
resistance,
Yes.
then she can do anything she wants to do. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's so it's more of a bigger, bigger fight.
This chat I had with Lola brings up for me something that I think probably a lot of white Westerners from English-speaking countries feel, is that we have this this completely undeserved privilege, for want of a better word, where we're white and English is our native language, and then when we travel around the world, life is so easy for us. I mean, in Lola's case, it's, I want to say merely, but that's the wrong word. It's the colour of her skin that would be creating a lot of the issues that that she sees and fights against so valiantly. But for me, just by pure luck, I happen to be born in Australia. I happen to be a native English speaker. I happen to have white skin, and therefore most of the travels I do around the world are really a simple thing to do compared to people from lots and lots of other countries. And it's really unfair, isn't it? But what can I do? I don't know. But I hope I can keep breaking down other stereotypes, and I hope I can support people like Lola, who are doing such a good job of proving that an African woman has a place in the world equivalent to the place that I have. And certainly as a professional travel photographer and writer, she's got an amazing place there, and a very well-deserved one, and I look forward to seeing her continued success. So I'm sure her daughter will grow up knowing that she can do anything she wants to do too. So everyone, keep travelling and see what else we can do to break down some of these stereotypes. Now, my final guest for today is Tom Parson from the Lego Backpacker. Now, he's had some really interesting moments in his life. He worked in China for a few years. He studied design and worked in furniture design, and was hired to work in China, and had some particularly interesting experiences there with the Chinese view, a stereotypical view of a Westerner.
So I find that with my travels and stuff, I'm fortunate when you're staying at a hostel or something like that, everyone's from everywhere, and I think people that stay at hostels have got that same frame of mind, where they just have to be open-minded and accepting to different people. But if you're living in a country, you'll hear it more from locals and stuff, where they're like, I don't like people from this country. And you're like, well, it doesn't matter on their race or their color or anything like that. It's kind of like their personality traits are different. But it's breaking through those kind of stereotypes, I think, is quite hard. But I think there are just different people out there who either haven't traveled or haven't met that many people, to kind of have that open mind of being accepting, or give someone 5 minutes, because once you talk to them, you might be like, oh wow, that person is a European version of one of my friends, or so it's different.
It's hard, isn't it? And I think for example, growing up in Perth, we've got a lot of people from different nationalities here. We're a lot of immigrants from all parts of the world, and nowadays even more so, and even more diverse. So we're kind of exposed to lots of different nationalities to start with, whereas in some other countries that's not the case. It's more homogenous, and they, even growing up, they haven't had as many foreigners or people from other countries to meet. Even in Japan, where certainly no one was ever rude to me as a foreigner, but just the fact that if I was out in the countryside, I lived in Japan for a couple of years, I remember being on trains and stuff, and the kids especially would just stare and stare. And sometimes I might have been the first foreigner that they'd seen, and obviously we look different, and so they stare. But it's just because they're not used to it as they've grown up, and hopefully later in life they get more exposure and they can have a broader opinion about these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the same experiences when I was living in China, because when I was in China, I was not ever living in the larger cities. Like, I was never living directly in Hong Kong, or like I was about an hour and a half outside Shanghai. And in those towns, they don't see many Westerners. So I know I was in a town called Jiading outside Shanghai for 2 years, and they had a population of about 1 million people, but there was only about 50 expats there.
Wow.
In the whole. So I was walking down the street, and if you see another Westerner, you always gave them that kind of subtle nod of like hello.
Yes.
But I mean, also you'll be walking down the street and you'll get people that will come up to you. I mean, I had people that will come up to me, and it's quite funny in China. You'll get they see a Westerner, they'll come up to you if they are learning English at school. They'll want to come and talk to you because they want to practice their English. Or you'll get random people that come up to you like, "Can I get a photo with you?" Which is so strange because it's like, I'm not a celebrity.
No.
But then you get other people that come up to you and they're just like, with very broken English, they'll be asking for money. And when you say, well, no, I'm not going to give you money, and then they'll get offended because they think, well, you're a Westerner, so you must have money, and they'll ask for it. So you've got to be polite at the same time, and usually the response was not so friendly. And I had that a few times, but it was interesting living and getting stared at a lot of the time. So especially when you turned up to factories and walking through a factory with 1,000. And I remember I was between the ages of about 23, 24 till I was about 27, 28. I was going through these factories, and I'd be the only Westerner. I was quite young, but I was fortunate that I was educated as well as I had skills working with the furniture manufacturing, and I'd be going through the factories and having to explain to them, and they'd be standing there, and I'd have translators, and a lot of them would be standing there going, what would this Westerner know about how to make furniture here, or what would they know about negotiating or things like that? So you always got some amazing stares and amazing insults at the same time, and all you can do is just prove them wrong or help them improve, but in a respectful manner, because of course in Asia you've got saving face. Well, that's not a major thing in Western culture, so it's quite interesting that way.
It just must have been a really fascinating experience to be in your 20s and to be working in factories like that kind of such a different experience that most people don't get to have.
It's absolutely crazy.
I think that Tom's experiences in China proves that you can't just break down stereotypes overnight, and particularly when he was living in a for China, small city where there were very few Westerners around, then it's really kind of at the beginning of the journey of breaking down the stereotype, because people are meeting a Westerner for the first time. Of course, they will only fall back on the stereotypes they already know about in order to kind of process that meeting. But over time, things will change, I suppose. And certainly Tom had some very intriguing experiences there. Well, I don't know what else to say about stereotypes when we travel. I'm feeling like feeling like a bit of a heavy topic. And it's just so tricky. And I really have this lovely idealistic belief that if we all travelled a lot and really got to know local people when we travel, not just, pass them by on a surface level, but, actually make the effort to develop some friendships with people from different nationalities and different cultures, then I think the more we do that, the more we realise, as several people said already today, that every person is really just the same. We all have the same basic needs and desires. And despite how we look or despite the customs we keep, really, we're just humans and we are what we are. But, bit by bit, keep travelling, everyone, and this will help. So, all right, thank you very much for listening to episode 34 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I would love to hear what you think about stereotypes when you're travelling in either direction. And you can have a chat with us in our Facebook group. So hop over to Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook and I will chat with you there. You can also get me on Twitter at Amanda Kendall or use the Thoughtful Travel Pod hashtag there as well. In the show notes, I'm going to leave some links so you can chase up these wonderful guests. For a start, Jeremy Kloberdanz of the Life Bohemian website and podcast. I'll leave a link to Jeremy and Katie's sites and podcast in the show notes. And also I'll leave a link to Lola's site, Geo Traveller's Niche. And she also referred to a blog post that she had written once. And I tracked it down on actually Women on the Road's blog. So you might remember Layla from Women on the Road has been a guest a few times. And it's quite an old post that Lola wrote some years back, but it's a really interesting one about breaking down stereotypes. And there's a link to that in the show notes. And finally, Tom Parson of the Lego Backpacker can be found best on Instagram. Just search for the Lego Backpacker in Instagram. Thank you again for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.
Jackrabbit FM. For your ears.
Who is that? Hi, Podcast.